All right, I want to break down the top 5 choices Kamala Harris has for her running mate. And I'm going to rank them 1 through 5 based on how I think they will improve her odds of winning the election. First up, we've got Senator Mark Kelly from Arizona. Everything the writers we've featured in our newsletter and that you'll see all across the press are saying about Mark Kelly are true. He's an astronaut. He's a military veteran. He is a popular senator living in a swing state. Trump does much better with men than Harris or Biden, and Kelly could provide a nice salve for that weakness. One underrated element of Kelly, he's a relatively new politician. That is both in vogue right now, see J.D. Vance and Donald Trump, and it's an advantage on the campaign trail, where a lack of opposition research about him will provide less attack ammunition. The GOP won't be able to run ads like the ones they're running against Kamala Harris, against Senator Kelly. And finally, he lives in a border state where he can talk about his proposals and his approach to immigration, an issue that is one of the weakest for Democrats, the Biden administration, and for Harris in particular. If I were a Democratic strategist, I'd be pushing Kelly hard. He would be my number one choice, and so he's ranked number 1 here. Number 2 is Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota. Honestly, I'm surprised more people aren't taking the prospect of him seriously. He's one of the most active and productive liberals in the country, and in Minnesota, he's managed to pass a constitutional right to abortion, 3 months of family leave and paid sick leave, universal free school meals, legal cannabis, free public college, automatic voter registration, and red flag laws for gun purchases, all with a slim majority in the state government. He has a military background. He had a career in education as well. He's also not very well known nationally, which means Democrats could define him however they want to the public. Governor Tim Walz is a very interesting choice. He's not a big name. He's not a household name, but I think he's probably number 2 on my list, which is where I'm putting him, because if you are a Democrat, if you are a liberal, this is a guy who gets a lot of things done that liberals and Democrats want. He's got the white male thing going on, which is clearly where Harris is looking. And while he's not from a swing state, he is from a state that borders the blue wall that Democrats need in the 2024 election. Number 3 is Governor Josh Shapiro from Pennsylvania. This is perhaps the most obvious choice on the board. He's a popular governor. He's from my home state. Shapiro has proved himself apt at winning the hearts of both liberals and conservatives, and he leads a state that Democrats cannot win the presidency without. Some people have suggested that because he's Jewish and a staunch supporter of Israel, he'd be a risky pick. Aside from being shocked that his Jewish faith is something viewed as a knock on his resume, I do think the people he'd bring over would outweigh the people he would lose for his support of Israel. In other words, there are progressives, I think, who would genuinely boycott the ticket with Josh Shapiro on it because of his stance on Israel and the war in Gaza. But I think he'd bring over more moderates and potentially never Trump conservatives if he's on the ticket than he and Harris would lose in terms of progressive voters. Number 4 is Gretchen Whitmer. That's right. I've got Gretchen Whitmer from Michigan, the governor, number 4 on my list. Even with reports that Whitmer isn't gunning for the job, it's a bit incredible to me how she is being discussed. On the one hand, I get why everyone thinks Harris has to pick a white guy. I've suggested that myself, so I'm guilty of it too. But could you imagine if Harris tapped Whitmer? It'd be a bold, newsy, shocking choice. It's the kind of high-risk, high-reward political play that the media would eat up. Harris could make the pick and say she was ignoring Whitmer's gender, a kind of anti-DEI pick, as you could easily argue that Whitmer is the most qualified choice. She's been governor of Michigan for 5 years. She was a state rep for 15 years before that. And aside from having the first ever all-woman ticket in the history of the country, Whitmer on paper is just like Kelly and Shapiro. She's a moderate governor from a swing state Democrats need to win. Her politics are not going to shock any centrists or moderates, and her poll numbers are considerably outpacing Biden's in Michigan, another must-win state for Democrats. Frankly, I understand all the risks, but if I were running the Harris campaign, I would give her a real, genuine, long look. And I think it's a bit shallow-minded for so many people, myself included, to outright dismiss the idea. And finally, number 5 is Andy Beshear from Kentucky. Outside of hailing from a swing state, Beshear checks every box. He's a moderate Democrat who can win over voters in a conservative state. He's a governor. He's got down-to-earth vibes that are kind of accentuated by this like Mr. Rogers-like demeanor, if you ever watch him talk. He's from Kentucky, and he's already attacking J.D. Vance for being a pretender, for claiming Kentucky. He won his state's gubernatorial race with 52% of the vote in November, which was an improvement on his margins from 4 years earlier. And he's now the most popular Democratic governor in America with a 67% approval rating. As with Shapiro, the hard part for Democrats would be losing him in Kentucky. And as with Governor Tim Walz, it's unclear how he'd hold up on the biggest stage. But there's a reason he's so popular and a reason he's on the short list. Of course, I know a lot of people are also floating Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg. I recognize that Mayor Pete is a great communicator, and when I watch his appearances on Bill Maher or Fox News, I get the appeal. A lot of people point to the fact that he's gay as the reason that Harris won't pick him, questioning whether Americans are ready for a black woman and a gay guy on the same ticket. I'm sure that would make a lot of people uncomfortable, but I think a far bigger issue is that his brand of politics just connects more with highly educated liberals than it does with a lot of more normie Americans that Democrats need to win over in 2024. Like Harris, there is a reason he didn't do all that well in 2020, and they've already got a 2020 underperformer on the ticket. Now, normally I would give some spiel here about how the vice president doesn't matter all that much, but for very obvious reasons, I think that's a pretty dated notion, especially in this race. It's top of mind for voters that the vice president could very well end up the president, especially in the case of Donald Trump, who is now 78 years old. And not enough people seem to realize what a risky pick J.D. Vance is. The early data indicates that he is the least popular running mate since 1980 by a long shot. Harris, for now, has an opportunity to narrow some of the concerns about her and demonstrate how she approaches important decisions, which we'll discuss in our Friday edition of the newsletter. Her pick will matter a great deal, and it will be fascinating to see what her risk threshold is and how her campaign views her own weaknesses. So that's it. That's my top 5 for Kamala Harris in terms of people who might help her win this race. Senator Mark Kelly from Arizona, Governor Tim Walz from Minnesota, Governor Josh Shapiro from Pennsylvania, Governor Gretchen Whitmer from Michigan, my hot take, and Andy Beshear, the governor from Kentucky. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you want more content like this, be sure to go to readtangle.com. Check out our website and our newsletter, where I go deep on all these candidates and what lies ahead for Kamala Harris. Peace.